Chapter 3. Above Tormance. Equatorial speed of planet, Gamma 1, fraction 16. Period of revolution, 22 Earth hours. Reported the summiter, pronouncing the words with extra-human clarity. A wide ribbon of recordings crawled into the travel journal receiver. The automaton of the dark flame carefully examined Tormance, not missing a single detail. The amount of carbon dioxide in the lower layer of the atmosphere is surprising, said Torlik. And how much more is dissolved in the oceans? This is similar to the Paleozoic geological era of Earth, when carbon dioxide was not yet partially connected with the processes of carbon formation. The greenhouse effect, inquired Solsain. The climate here is generally mild and uniform. The equator of Tormance runs vertically compared to Earth, that is, perpendicular to the plane of the orbit, and the axis of rotation is synonymous with the line of the orbit. This could give a sharp zonality, but Tormance runs in orbit 4 times faster than Earth. Lack of water could negate these benefits. Griff Rift intervened, reading the protruding curves of the surface. The area of the oceans is 55 hundredths, and the median fluctuation in depth is 1 to 2 kilometers. This alone does not speak of a lack of moisture, said Torlik. We will study the balance of evaporation, water vapor saturation, and the distribution of wind flows. There is no reason to expect large ice reserves at the poles in such a climate, nor do we see any, and there are no polar fronts or strong movements of air masses at all. The crew continued to work at their instruments, from time to time casting glances at the visual overview shaft, which General Attel had opened for them. Piercing the thickness of the ship walls, ending with a broad window made of transparent yttrium ceramics, the shaft, through a system of mirrors, made it possible to view the planet with the naked eye. In the transparent window under a starship, the planet was barely moving. The dark flame rotated at an altitude of 22,000 kilometers, slightly slower than the planet, convenient for viewing the surface of Tormance. The cloud cover, which had at first seemed to the Earthlings mysteriously dense, abounded at the equator with large gaps. Floating in those gaps were leaden seas, brown plains like steppes or forests, yellow ridges and massifs of ruined low mountains. The observers gradually grew accustomed to the sight of the planet, and more details became clear through the images. Tormance, almost equivalent in size to Earth and similar to it in many general aspects of the planetary arrangement, differed sharply from her in the details of its planetography. The seas occupied a wide area at the equator, and the continents were shifted to the poles. Divided by meridional straits, or rather seas, the continents were composed of what looked like 2 crowns, each made up of 4 segments, expanding towards the equator and tapering off towards the poles, similar to South America of Earth. From a distance, the surface of the planet generated the impression of symmetry, acutely different from the complex outlines of the seas and land of Earth. Large rivers ran mainly from the poles to the equator, flowing into the equatorial ocean or its bays. Between them were vast sections of dry land, apparently deserts. What will the planetologists say, said Solsain, eyes narrowed as usual. A bizarre planet. Nothing bizarre, answered Torlik weightily, more ancient than our Earth, but rotating faster. Consequently, the polar shift of the continents passed faster and went further than ours. The symmetry, or rather the similarity between one hemisphere and the other, a matter of coincidence. Probably, the depths of Tormance are calmer than those of Earth, not such sharp valleys and peaks. There are no or few active volcanoes. The planetary quakes are weaker. All this is natural. Another aspect is more surprising. Enrichment with carbon dioxide at high oxygen content? Griffrift exclaimed. The Tormanzians have burned too much fossil fuel. Here it will be difficult for us to breathe, and we will have to avoid the deep depressions in the relief. On the other hand, the sea, saturated with carbon dioxide, will be transparent, as in the most ancient geological epochs of Earth, probably with a mass of calcareous sediment at the bottom. All this does not square with the size of the settlement marked by the Cephians 250 years ago. Here we have many contradictions between planetography and demography, Griff agreed. Maybe it is not worth trying to unravel them until we descend into low orbit. Seeing as there are no artificial satellites, nothing apart from the risk of detection prevents us from orbiting the planet at any height. The more so since we have already taken everything we need from the first orbit, Torlik joined in hotly. Chetty and Fay are still busy. Our linguist has managed to get texts of sufficient length in order to ascertain the structure of the language using the Kam-Amat method. Fay Rodis wants us, watching their television programs as we approach the planet, to already understand the speech of the Tormanceans on arrival. Well-reasoned, avoid the false associations from which persistent clichés are formed, interfering with understanding. Oh, ye planetologists are trained rather well, even in psychology. The imperfection of physical cosmologists, focusing only on their field, has long been noticed. Without the concept of man himself as a factor on a planetary scale, dangerous errors occurred. Now they are monitoring this, said Torlik, getting up and stopping the idle run of the yellow ribbon. And together with that, ye have excelled in your profession. Having barely completed the tasks of Hercules, ye invented the gypsum bolometer, and from the satellite discovered that giant copper-mercury belt, still argued about by geologists as the rarest exception, Griffith added. The young planetologist turned pink out of pleasure, and to hide his embarrassment, he added, and this exception lies at a depth of 20 kilometers, under almost the entire Siniski shield. The planetologist did not have to wait long. A few days passed, the nights were very short at such an altitude, and the dark flame slipped quietly into an orbit less than half the diameter of Tormance, and, in order not to expend a great deal of energy, increased its relative speed. Chetty and Fay Rodis hung the round hall with hypnotables of the language of Tormance. Each member of the crew, having completed their main tasks, would come here and sink into contemplation over various schemes, while simultaneously listening and subconsciously remembering the sounds and meanings of the words of this foreign language. Not entirely alien, the semantics and aldeology one were very similar to the ancient languages of Earth, with an amazing mixture of East Asian words and the most widespread language by the end of the EDW, English. Like that of Earth, the language of Tormance was all planetary, but with some residual dialects in the different hemispheres of the planet, for which it was necessary to invent conditional names similar to earthly ones. The hemisphere facing forward along the run of Tormance in orbit, they called north, and to the rear, south. They would find out later that the astronomers of Tormance called them respectively the head and tail hemispheres, of life and of death. The universality of the language facilitated the task of the researchers, but the changes in pitch and the nasal, now prolonged, now accelerated pronunciation, turned out to be much more difficult than those of Earth, with its clear and clean pronunciation. What is this for? Griffith was as indignant as the most lagging of all Chetty students. Is it not possible to express a nuance of meaning in an extra word instead of howling, screaming, or meowing? Is this not a return to the ancestors from the number of those galloping among the branches? For some, it is easier to pronounce one and the same word in different ways, changing the meaning, Tevisa protested, masterfully meowing as it had been expressed by the commander. And for me, it is simpler to memorize 10 words rather than howl in the middle or at the end of an already known one. Griff frowned in displeasure. Is there really such a difference between 100 and 150,000 words? There really is, if the orthography so strongly does not match the pronunciation, as with the Tormanceans, Chetty said authoritatively. How could such a ridiculous discrepancy happen, out of short-sighted conservatism? This was also observed with us in the time before the world language and before the rationalization of the multilinguality that compelled the invention of translation machines. With the acceleration of social development, the language began to evolve and enrich, but the orthography remained at the same level. Even worse, they persistently simplified it, making language easier for lazy or stupid people, in a time where social development required ever greater complexification. And as a result, the language lost its phonetic wealth? Inevitably. In essence, the process was more complicated. For example, with the rise of culture, every nation of the earth enriched the everyday language that expressed feelings, describing the visible world and inner experiences. Then, in the course of the division of labor, there emerged a technical, professional language. With the development of techniques, this language became richer, until the number of words in it exceeded the general emotional language, which, by contrast, became poorer. And I suspect that the general emotional language of Tormance is at least as poor as ours was at the end of the EDW, likely even poorer. Does this mean a preponderance of professional life over leisure? Without any doubt. Each person had little time for education, art, sports, even simply for communication one with another. Much less than his obligations before society, and the necessary for life pursuits. There may be yet another thing, ineptitude in using leisure time for self-education and improvement. Both the one and the other are signs of poor organization and a low level of social consciousness. Fay Rodis says that the texts we have read from the Tormance radio shows have as little meaning as it was with us in the ancient historical periods of the EDW, when the daily newsletters, television and radio programs printed on sheets of cheap paper carried no more than 3 to 5% of useful information. Moreover, from the presence of a large number of semantic stereotypes, Rodis suspects that the writing of the planet is for some reason at a low level of development. But we haven't seen the writing yet, as we've been deciphering the language according to the recordings of memory machines. We have to study the writing too? Vir Noreen sighed jokingly. How long do we have to orbit Tormance? Not too long. Chetty consoled him. Now things will get more interesting. Today, Olades began to intercept television shows, and, probably no later than tomorrow, we will see the life of Tormance. They saw. Tormance television had not reached the finest idoplastic techniques of Earth, but the broadcasts were clear, with a good color spectrum. The crew of the Dark Flame, with the exception of those on duty, was seated in front of a huge stereo screen, watching the alien life for hours. The people of Tormance were so similar to Earthlings that there could be no more doubts over the historians' estimations as to the fate of the 3 EWR starships. A strange sensation came over the Earthlings. It was as if they were watching some mass, staged production of their own historical themes. They witnessed gigantic cities, sparsely strewn across the planet, like funnels, sucking in the bulk of the population. Inside the cities, the people of Tormance lived in cramped, high-rise buildings, under which daily technical work took place in the labyrinths of the dungeons. Each city was bordered by a belt of stunted groves, wide roads, like tentacles, cutting through them and stretching into vast fields, planted with some crops, similar to the soybeans and potatoes of Earth, cultivated in large quantities. The largest cities were located near the shores of the equatorial ocean, in those sections of river deltas where rocky soil supported large buildings. Far from rivers and cultivated fields, colossal stretches of land were dominated by dry steppes with sparse grassy vegetation and a never-ending monotony of bush. In the belts of cultivated land, the absence of permanent settlements was striking. Some dull buildings, long and low, wearied the eye with a repetition of uniformity everywhere, both in the head and tail hemispheres, near large cities and lower concentrations of the population. Heavy vehicles moved in the dust, cultivating the soil or harvesting, and wagons, no less heavy, rumbled along smooth and wide roads. The Earthling observers could not understand why these huge trucks were so noisy, until they realized that the monstrous rumble was simply due to poor engine design and careless fitting of parts. Hour after hour, not daring to break the silence and disturb their comrades, the inhabitants of the Earth watched the life of the distant planet, stunned by the mass of first impressions. From time to time, members of the crew of the Dark Flame would get up and withdraw to that part of the round hall behind a light partition where food was served at a long table. There, exchanging impressions, they quickly ate and returned to the screens again, afraid to miss even an hour of Tormansian television. Actually not Tormance, but the planet Yanyach, as it was called in Tormansian language. However, the name Tormance had so firmly entered the minds of the expedition members during those many months of preparation when it was the main orientation of their thoughts, that the Earthlings continued to use it. They also discovered the main city of the planet, whose name, translated into the language of Earth, meant Center of Wisdom. The conjecture of Fay Rodis turned out to be right, as it was confirmed that Tormansian writing was a system of complex symbols, ideograms which even the keenest minds among the Earthlings would need plenty of time to master. Luckily, there was a simplified set of written signs used in everyday life and in the light language of print news. New tablets decorated the walls of the hall on the Dark Flame. Decorated because the markings corresponded to the aesthetic sense of the starship crew. Their intricate interweaving seemed like elegant, abstract designs. The texts were written either in black on bright yellow paper or in intense dark green paint on a pale blue background. How beautiful in comparison with the wretched simplicity of our linear alphabet, admired Olades. Maybe when we return, we should submit the alphabet of Tormance to the CUI, Council of Universal Improvements? I don't think so, said Fay Rodis. Alphabets of this kind have already been used on Earth, and even for many centuries. Conservatives of all times and peoples defended their advantage over purely phonetic ones, similar to those that gave rise to our linear writing. They argued that, being ideograms, these signs can be read with a single meaning by people speaking different languages. And the letters become not only abstract signs, but also symbols of a specific meaning, said Olades. That's why there are so many, but too few for the entire volume of exponentially expanding human thought, Chedidan added. Ye have correctly noticed the main contradiction. Fay Rodis confirmed, nothing is given for nothing, and the advantages of ideographic writing become null and void with the development of culture and science. And its drawback is enhanced 100-fold, a semantic fossil contributing to a lag in thinking, slowing down its development. A complex, beautiful letter, expressing thousands of shades of thought where millions are needed, becomes an archaism, a kind of pictogram of people of the Stone Age, from where it undoubtedly originated. I gave up a long time ago, Fay, laughed Olades. In the CUI, I would have been declared a supporter of cave thinking. Thank ye for saving me from shame. It is unlikely that the CUI would deal with ye so mercilessly, Fay Rodis answered in the same tone. This council is mostly made up of men, and skeptics besides. This combination is unstable towards persons of our sex, especially with your data. Ye joke, Chedi said seriously, but for me, such a long existence of ideograms on Tormance seems tragic. This is the inevitable backwardness of thinking. Rather, the slowdown in progress and the archaicism of form, Rodis corrected her. Backwardness implies comparison. With whom? If with us, then at what historical level? Our modern society is far higher. How many centuries of a good, reasoned, and friendly life? Avid hunger for knowledge of the world, happiness of enrichment with beauty and joy are left behind. Which of us would refuse to live in those days? Not me, said Vir Noreen. They, our ancestors, knew so little. I could, and so would I, agreed Fay Rodis, but the boundless ocean of knowledge that extends ahead of us also stretched out ahead of them. There is no emotional difference, and personal dignity, dreams and love, friendship and understanding, everything that grows and educates us, in this we are the same. Why refuse Tormance a similar step, just because of backward writing? Moreover, the main evidence of Tormanzianism obviously has disappeared. Our demograms do not confirm the colossal population counted by the Cephians. We disagree on the whole order. Incredible! Griffriff shook his head. The Cephians have generally proved to be good planetographers. Is this a mistake, or a sharp drop in numbers? Finished Fay Rodis. Maybe, but that means a catastrophe, and we noticed nothing special. Not necessarily a catastrophe, said Tivisa Heneko. Over 250 years have passed since the visit of the Cephians. Take the average life expectancy characteristic of the beginning of EWR, 70 years. Over a period equal to 4 times the life expectancy, the population of Tormance could decrease even more significantly or, conversely, increase for purely internal reasons. To me it seems that internal causes are the worst kind of catastrophe, Chedi said. So far I don't like the planet Yan Yak from their television shows. As if justifying Chedi's words, melodious music was heard from the depths of the stereo screen, only occasionally interrupted by dissonant beats and screams. Before the Earthlings appeared an area on a hill, covered with something similar to brown glass. A glass path led across a square towards a staircase of the same material. A ledge adorned with tall vases and massive pillars of gray stone reached up to a glass building sparkling in the red sun just a few steps further. A light pediment was supported by low columns with extravagant ligature supports of bright yellow metal. A faint haze of smoke rose from 2 black bowls in front of the entrance. A group of young people moved along the glass road, waving short sticks and striking them against ringing and buzzing discs. Some carried on belts thrown over their shoulders, small red and gold boxes tuned to the same music that the Earthlings would classify as part of the green-blue spectrum. Until now, all the music they had heard from Tormance belonged only to a red or yellow array of tonalities and melodies. The camera approached those walking, singling out 2 couples among the crowd, looking back at their companions and beyond towards the city with a strange mixture of alarm and boldness. All four were dressed in the same bright yellow capes, colored with twists of black snakes with gaping mouths. Each of the men offered a hand to his companion. Continuing to move sideways to the stairs, they suddenly began to sing, or rather, piercingly started to wail. The calling chorus was picked up by all those accompanying. Chetty Dane, Fay Rodis, and Tevisa Heneko, who had best mastered the language of Tormance, listened intently. They clicked on a special sound filter which modulated rapid, illegible speech. They glorify early death, considering it to be the primary duty of a person in relation to society, exclaimed Tevisa Heneko. Fay Rodis was silent, leaning toward the screen, as she always did, amazed at all she saw. Chetty Dawn covered her face with her hands, repeating the hastily translated chorus, the melody of which the Earthlings had first enjoyed. The highest wisdom is to go into death full of health and strength, avoiding the sorrows of old age and the inevitable suffering of the experience of life. Just as one leaves on a warm night after an evening meeting of friends. Just as one leaves on a fresh morning after a night with loved ones, quietly closing the door on the blossoming garden of life. And the mighty men, the support and the guard go slamming the gates. The last blow is carried in the darkness of the dungeons of the times, concealing in equal measure the future and the past. Chetty cut short the translation and, looking at Fay Rodis in astonishment, added, "They sing that the dead of death comes in the 101st year of their life." Or, according to their second White Star calendar, which is no different from ours after 25 years. These four are being escorted to the Temple of Gentle Death. How can such a society exist? Olades cried out indignantly, forgetting decorum. The higher the social structure and the science, the later a person matures. That's why we biologists, primarily even since ancient times of the EDW, set the goal of prolonging life. Or rather, youth, said Naya Holly, not taking her eyes off the Tormansian procession, now ascending the steps. For us, because of the complexity of life and the huge volume of information, a person is considered a child before the feats of Hercules. Youth continues for another 20 years, maturity comes only at 40 years. Then we have before us 70 years, or even a whole century of maturity, full of energy, powerful labor, and the cognition of life. Instead of 10-20 years, as in antiquity, in earlier times, a person was considered old by the age of 40. I would be an old woman, said Fay Rodis, and a person would die never having learned anything about the diversity and beauty of the world. Virnorine echoed indignantly. But in such an antiquity, when 90% of people could not even read, this was not surprising. Long life was burdensome, simply unnecessary. Those who died in their youth were called the favorites of the gods. But Tormance has a rather high technical civilization. How could they cut down trees that have not yet borne fruit? This is madness and ruin. There, you forget that this is not a communist or even a socialist society, but a class social structure. In my opinion, this monstrous custom of early death is directly related to overpopulation and depletion of the planet's resources, said Rodis. I get it, Chetty said. Early death is not for everyone. Yes. Those who lead the technical progress should live longer, not to mention the ruling elite. Those who are unable to give society anything but their life and simple physical labor, that is, those who are incapable of a high level of education, are the ones who die. In any case, there are two classes on Tormance, educated and uneducated, over which the rulers stand, and somewhere between them are people of art, entertaining, decorating, and justifying. They don't die at 25 either, exclaimed Olades. Naturally. But perhaps for artists, from whom youth and beauty are required, the limit of life is just a little more, said Fay Rodis. And on the TVF of the starship sharp, wildly rhythmic music thundered, replaced by the tunes of the march, the coordinated rhythmic course of many people. The screeching sounds of unknown instruments interrupted the barely perceptible thread of a bounding and erratic melody. The movie began. Along the expanses of tall grassy steppes, lumbering wagons were being pulled by horned tetrapods, resembling terrestrial ruminants, either antelopes or bulls. Riding on the longer-legged, deer-like animals galloped deeply tanned Tormansians, brandishing axes or mechanisms similar to the ancient firearms of Earth. The horsemen fearlessly fought back waves of creeping short-legged predators, hordes of terrible snakes with high heads squeezed in from the sides. Sometimes the same horsemen attacked the wagons, shooting at full gallop. In a shootout, either those in the caravans traveling along the steppes or the attackers, or both, died. The Earthlings quickly realized that they were watching a film about the settlement of Tormancians on the planet. It remained unclear who the attacking bandits were. They could not be considered aboriginals of the planet, since they were no different from the immigrants. There were many films, productions, and paintings on the theme of the heroic past, on the conquest of a new planet that the crew of the Dark Flame would have to watch. Fierce fights, races, murders alternated with a surprisingly flat and wretched display of spiritual life. Everywhere and always young men triumphed, endowed with qualities especially valuable in this imaginary world of entertaining illusions. Belligerence, strength, quick reactions, the ability to shoot from a primitive weapon in the form of a tube out of which a weighty slug of metal was blasted by the force of gas expansion. Similar topics were repeated in different variations, and the Earthlings became very quickly fed up. Nevertheless, they continued to watch because, often interspersed in the mindless plots, were pieces of genuine chronicles of ancient times. In these old scraps, the face of the pristine and rich life of the planet, as yet untouched by human intervention, was visible. It was like prehistoric Earth, only with an even mightier animal and plant kingdom. The colonization resembled the earlier settlement of America by the white race on Earth. Pioneers on the frontiers, free, unbridled, poorly abiding by laws, and guardians of faith and public order in habitable centers. Then, curbing the pioneers to the complete suppression of free society. And for good reason, the capital of the planet was called the City of the Center of Wisdom. This name originated in the pioneering times of the settling of the planet Tormance. On Tormance, the steppes initially prevailed over the forests. The nature of the planet did not give rise to animal giants, such as the elephants, rhinos, or giraffes of Earth. The largest of the four-legged land animals were horned creatures the size of an average Earth bull. Now extinct, colossal herds of bull-like and antelope-like creatures had once flooded the vast plains. In the shallow seas, warmed by the rays of the red sun, the fish, strikingly similar to those on Earth, teemed in vast thickets of algae. The absence of strong winds on the planet was confirmed by the fact that trees of sizes inconceivable on Earth once grew on elevated sections of the equatorial coast. In areas closer to the poles, vast swamps formerly existed, covered with thickets of monogenous trees similar to Earth's taxodiums, only with a brownish tint of small and narrow leaflets which looked like flattened needles. All this had all existed on Tormance, as the films made in remote times indisputably testified. But now the Earthlings saw only either cultivated fields or endless areas of low shrubs everywhere, heated by the sun and devoid of any other vegetation. Even the faint Tormance winds heaved and swirled thick dust over the bushes. The dry steppes looked more welcoming, but even there the grass seemed low and sparse, resembling the semi-deserts once widespread in the region of the trade wind rings of Earth. Perhaps films about the past of the planet appeased the natural longing of the Tormanzians for the former diversity of their indigenous nature. The overwhelming majority of the population lived in huge cities, where, of course, daring races and shooting on the plains or hunting expeditions into dense forests under bright and clear stars had forever receded into the irreversible past. It was more difficult to explain spectacles of a different character in which beautiful, semi-naked women moved erotically and froze in the arms of men in, frankly, disgusting poses. At the same time, the Earthlings never saw the full nakedness or pure openness of Eros, so common on their home planet. Here, something was purposefully obscured, distorted, hidden, hinting at some forbidden or secret qualities, probably with the aim of arousing a weak imagination, or giving a special taste to sexual relations that had become boring and had lost interest. This specific eroticism was combined with the obligation of clothing, unknown on Earth. No one dared to appear in public places or to be at home in the presence of other people without a completely covered body. Women mostly wore loose short shirts with long, wide sleeves and low collars, cut by soft, usually black, belts and wide trousers or sometimes long skirts down to the ankles. Men wore similar garb but with shorter shirts. Only the youth appeared in shorts above the knees, very similar to earthly ones. In public gatherings or at festivals, they wore clothes of bright and patterned fabrics and donned short cloaks or capes with magnificent embroidery. To the Earthlings, their clothing seemed comfortable and easy to manufacture, consistent with the warm climate of the planet, and the most diverse working conditions. Beautiful combinations of different shades of red and yellow apparently were favored by most women and very much suited the olive tone of their skin and their black hair. Men preferred gray-violet and purple colors with contrasting trim on the collars and sleeves. Some Tormansians wore stripes in the form of an elongated horizontal rhombus with some specific symbols on the left side of the chest above the heart. As Chetty noted, those who wore the rhombus also had a glisten in the eye and were given special respect. In general, mutual respect for one another seemed to be absent. The unceremonious jostling on the street and unwillingness to give way or to help a stumbling traveler astonished the star pilots. Moreover, petty accidents, such as falling on the street, caused laughter from random witnesses. As soon as a person broke a fragile object, scattered some burden, people smiled, as if rejoicing in a minor calamity. In the case of a major calamity, TV shows sometimes showed catastrophes with carts or aircraft. A crowd would immediately gather. People surrounded the victims and stood silently, watching with eager curiosity, as men dressed in yellow, apparently doctors and rescuers, helped the wounded. The crowd would swell. New spectators would come running from all sides with equally greedy, bestial curiosity on their faces. The fact that people ran up not to help, but only to see, shocked the Earthlings most of all. Whether the transmission came directly from stadiums, factories, communication stations, city streets, or even from dwellings, the voice of the speaker or the music was invariably accompanied by a dull, monotonous roar, initially taken by the star pilots as the imperfection of the transmission. It turned out that on Tormance, they didn't care at all about eliminating noise. Engines of vehicles thundered and rattled, and the sky quaked under the noise of aircraft. Tormansians talked loudly, whistled and shouted, utterly unashamed in front of those around them. Thousands of small radios poured into the general drone of a dissonant cacophony of music, singing, or just loud and unpleasantly modulated speech. How the inhabitants of the planet could withstand such never-ceasing repulsive noise, which abated only in the dead of night, remained a mystery to the doctor and biologist of the dark flame. Gradually delving into the alien life, the Earthlings discovered a strange feature in the broadcasts of all planetary news. It was so different to the content of the general broadcast programs of Earth that it warranted special study. Scant attention was given to the achievements of science, the display of art, historical finds and discoveries, which occupied the main place in earthly broadcasts, to say nothing of the news of the Great Circle being completely absent on Tormance. There were no all-planetary discussions of any changes in the social structure, improvements or projects of large buildings, large-scale research organizations. No one raised any questions, posing them as on Earth before the councils or personally before any of the best minds of mankind. Very little space was devoted to showing and discussing new problem-related theater productions, trying to catch the emerging twists and changes in social consciousness and personal virtues. Most of the coverage was devoted to films about the bloody past, the conquest, or rather the extermination of nature and mass sports games. It seems strange to the people of Earth how sports could gather such a huge number of spectators who were not participating in the competitions, and who for some reason came to an incredible excitement from the contemplation of the struggle of athletes. The Earthlings come to understand the essence of the matter only later. In sports competitions, carefully selected people performed, devoting all their time to strenuous and mindless training in their sports specialty. All others had no place in competitions. Physically and spiritually weak Tormansians, like little children, adored their outstanding athletes. It seemed funny and even repulsive. A similar position was occupied by the artists. Of the millions of people, only a handful were selected. They were afforded the best living conditions, the right to participate in any productions, films, and concerts. Their names served as bait for many spectators competing for seats in theaters, and these artists themselves, called stars, were subjected to the same naive deification as the athletes. The position reached by the star deprived her or him of any other activity. On Tormance, it was apparently not possible for any other person who was able to independently achieve the heights of art to act as an artist, as on Earth. In general, the imprint of narrow professionalism lay on the whole life of Tormance, impoverishing the feelings of people and restricting their horizons. Perhaps it only seemed this way to the star pilots because of the selection of events and informational materials. Only direct contact with the people of the planet could resolve this question. In TV shows and radio information, a lot of attention was paid to a small group of people, their statements and trips, meetings and decisions. Most often mentioned was the name Choyo Chagas, whose considerations on various topics of public life, primarily economics, caused unbridled delight and was praised as the highest state wisdom. Perhaps distant from the authentic vision of the genius, covering the entire depth and breadth of the problem, the statements of Choyo Chagas were in some ways very important for the inhabitants of Tormance. How could the aliens soaring at an altitude of 6,000 kilometers make judgments about this? Fay Rodis and Griffrift warned their young comrades against this type of hot and harsh judgment. For some strange reason, despite the constant reports of the speeches and trips of Choyo Chagas and 3 other people, his closest assistants, who made up the Council of the Four, the supreme organ of the planet Yanyak, none of the star pilots had yet been able to see them. Most often mentioned, these people seemed to be present everywhere and nowhere. Only once in a broadcast from the city of the Center of Wisdom did a crowd block the streets and squares, welcoming with enthusiastic roars a convoy of 5 cars, heavy as the armored cars of ancient times of the Earth, crawling through a crowd of people. Nothing could be seen through the dark tinted windows, but the Tormanzians, enraptured by mass psychosis, shouted and gestured, as they did in their sports events. The Earthlings realized that these 4, led by Choyo Chagas, were the true rulers of everyone and everything. As usual with the ancient peoples, the inhabitants of Tormance were dominated by uniform names, and therefore they had to bear 3 names. Sometimes they came across people with only 2 names. Apparently, the 2 named constituted the upper classes of society on the planet. Tormancean names sounded somewhat similar to Earth names, but with a dissonance of syllables difficult for the Earthlings to pronounce. Choyo Chagas, Gentlo Shea, Kondo Laluf, and Zetrino Umrog. These were the names of the 4 supreme rulers. Except Choyo Chagas, all the names were allowed to be abbreviated. General Shi, Kaluf, Zetuji were repeated with annoying monotony in the same order after the name of Choyo Chagas, which sounded like some magic incantation of wild ancestors. Ola Dez jokingly announced that all Earthlings with their system of double, infinitely diverse names should belong to the upper class on Tormance. "And you would like this? You would not be ashamed?" asked Chetty Don. I would have the opportunity to see the genuine masters over the life and death of any person. Back in the 2nd cycle school, I was fond of historical fantasies. Most of all, I was fascinated by books about powerful kings, conquerors, about pirates and tyrants. All the tales of the earth are full of these, no matter which of the ancient countries they belong to. "This is not serious, Ola," Chetty said. "The greatest suffering of humanity was caused by exactly these people, almost always ignorant and cruel. One is closely related to the other. In a poorly organized society, a person must either develop a strong, fearless psyche that serves as self-defense, or, as happens much more often, rely only on an external support, God. If no God, then faith and superhumans would arise, with the same need for worship of sun-like leaders, omnipotent sovereigns. Those who played this role, usually dark politicians, could give humanity only fascism and nothing more. Among them were both wise men and heroes," Oladez said, not embarrassed. "I would like to meet such people." She threw her hands behind her head and leaned her back against the ledge of the sofa, dreamily narrowing her eyes. Fay Rodis stared at the communications engineer. "Chetty is right in one aspect," she said. "In the actions of all these lords, besides conditioning, there was also a lack of understanding of the distant consequences. This gave rise to irresponsibility, leading to tragic results. But I understand Oladez." "How?" exclaimed at once Chetty, Veer, and Tavisa. "Any person on Earth is so careful in his actions that he loses in comparison with the rulers of our antiquity. He has no outward signs of might, although in reality he is like a cautiously walking giant elephant in front of a frightened deer rushing ahead." "A lord, and scared," laughed Ola. "One contradicts the other. And therefore, it constitutes a dialectical unity," concluded Fay Rodis. Discussions of this kind were repeated many times, but suddenly the calm study of the planet came to an end. The night watchman of radio broadcasts, this time it was General Atal, raised the alarm of Rodis, Griff, and Chetty. All 4 gathered at a dark screen cut only by a luminous indicator line with its bursts of oscillation. The translation machine was turned off, because the words that sounded in the overtone vortex were now understandable to the star pilots. The message from the main observatory of the tail continent is confirmed by tracking stations. An unknown celestial body is orbiting our planet, probably a starship. The orbit is circular, the angle to the equatorial plane, 45, height, 200, speed. They can even calculate orbits, Griffith muttered. The dimensions of the celestial body, according to preliminary data, are much smaller than the starship that visited us in the Age of Wise Denial. The second report of tracking stations to follow at 8 in the morning. And so, we are discovered, Griffith said with a touch of sadness, addressing Fay Rodis. What will we do? Rodis did not have time to answer before a large screen flashed and a familiar speaker appeared on it. This is an urgent message. Attention, everyone. Attention, City of the Center of Wisdom. The Tormancian spoke abruptly, sharply, as if breaking in the middle of phrases. He relayed the message about the starship and finished. At 10 tomorrow morning, the associate of the great Choyo Chagas, Zug himself, will speak. Attention, all citizens of the Center of Wisdom. What will we do? Griffith asked once more, muting the repeating message. Talk to Tormance. After the announcement of Zug, we will interrupt the broadcast, and I will appear on all screens with a request to land. Oladez has prepared for such an event. A blush of light excitement appeared on the cheeks of Fay Rodis. At the appointed time, the entire crew of the starship gathered at the communication screens. The most important moment had come. It was for the sake of this moment that they had been sent by Earth and made the whole incredible direct beam flight. All depended on how the relations of the guests, regrettably uninvited, with the Tormanzians, or rather with their lords, would develop. For the decision of this small group of people, perhaps even Choyo Chagas alone, would determine the will of Tormance and the success of the Earthlings expedition. The signal clock above the wing of the reflector of the stereo screen was synchronized with the time of the main city of Tormance. Fay Rodis, who had retired to her cabin for a while, appeared about a quarter of an hour before the announcement of Zug. She had apparently, in advance, prepared a dress of the beloved Tormanzian color, red with a golden-orange fluffy tint that gave a deep tone to the fabric. The familiar features of Fay Rodis, shaded by this dress, became more steadfast and firmer, almost formidable, and her smooth movements took on the glare of the red sun of Tormance. She had cut her hair even shorter, leaving her proud neck completely bare. Carefully combed, with curls of black hair on her cheeks, without a single beautification, Fay Rodis sat in a chair in front of the screen, not exchanging a word with her companions. The usual muffled singing of the PEC devices did not violate the guarded silence of the ship. Echoing, buzzing metal strikes, like on a huge battle shield, heralded the beginning of the speech of one of the rulers of the planet. For some time the screen remained blank, then a small man in a red cape, embroidered with fancifully writhing golden snakes, appeared. His skin seemed lighter than most Tormance people. An unhealthy puffiness softened sharp folds around a wide, thin-lipped mouth. Small, intelligent eyes sparkled with determination and, at the same time, darted restlessly, as if the Tormancian was afraid that something might slip from his view. Oladez suppressed a sigh of bewilderment and disappointment and glanced at Fay Rodis, who remained impassive, as if the appearance of this man was not a surprise to her. Zitrino Umrog ran a small hand along a high forehead with a receding hairline, furrowed by overlapping wrinkles. People of Yanyak, the great Choyo Chagas has instructed me to warn ye of a danger. From the dark and cold depths of the universe, an alien has appeared in our skies. A piloted ship of hostile forces. We declare a state of emergency throughout the planet in order to repel the enemy. Let us follow the example of our ancestors, their wisdom during the reign of Inokao, and the courage of the people who drove out the uninvited aliens in the Age of Wise Denial. Long live Choyo Chagas! Maybe enough? The ruler has expressed himself clearly, whispered Oladez from behind the remote. Fay Rodis nodded her head, and Ola rotated the blue globe to capacity, turning on the pre-configured TVF setting to full power. The image of Zug faltered, broke up into colorful zigzags, and disappeared. For a split second, Fay Rodis managed to notice the expression of fright on the face of the Lord. She rose and stood in the scope of the main focus. She looked directly into the rhombus of the central ray, and in her peripheral vision she saw herself on the screens, as in a mirror. In front of the amazed Tormancians, instead of the twisted and broken image of Zug, a beautiful smiling woman, surprisingly similar to themselves, with a tender and strong voice appeared. People and rulers of Yanyak, we have come from Earth, the planet that birthed and nourished your ancestors. Chance has removed us into the depths of space, previously inaccessible to us. Now we are able to overcome it, and have come to ye as direct blood relatives to join efforts in achieving a better life. We have never been anyone's enemies and are full of good feelings towards ye, with which nothing can separate us and absolute understanding is possible. We ask permission to descend to your planet to get to know ye, tell ye about the life of Earth, and convey to ye everything that we know to be useful and good. Our ship's crew consists of only 13 people like ye, a handful in comparison with the many inhabitants of Yanyak. Your accepting us as guests of your planet represents no danger for ye. We have learned your language in order to avoid mistakes and misunderstandings. The screen rippled with gray, becoming flat and empty. From the depths of it arose a howling, interrupting sound, through which the voice of the speaker of the city of the Center of Wisdom, already familiar to the Earthlings, shouted, "Transmission! Cease transmission!" Fay Rodis exchanged a glance with the Griffrift and, stepping back, sat down in her former place. Oladez reached for the ball of the switch, but Rodis gestured for her to stop. Bending down over the receiver, she spoke loudly and clearly, paying no heed to the howl and whistle of interference. "Starship, Dark Flame calls to the Council of the Four." Calls the Council of the Four. We repeat our request to allow landing. Please inform Choyo Chagas, Chairman of the Council of the Four. We await a response at the indirect frequency of your navigation transmissions. We await a response. Oladez turned off the TVF. The blue light of the ellipsoid antenna ignited. After a howl and screaming cries in the round hall, dead silence fell. It was broken by Rodis herself. "I can't take it as a success," she said with concern. "I would say that the attempt to introduce ourselves to Tormance has failed." Griffrift smiled thinly. "What's the matter with these rulers?" Chetty exclaimed indignantly. "Are they afraid?" The same thing that all those raised by capitalism were afraid of, imbued with the envy of enforced inequality. "They're afraid of competition," said Fay Rodis sadly. "That is, afraid that we will take away power?" asked Chetty. "Of course, but this is wild and ridiculous. Why would we need power in a strange world? This is clear to us, to the whole Earth, to the Great Circle, but it is unlikely that many people on Tormance understand this. Then why should we even ask for a landing? Obviously, we will not understand each other," asked Chetty, shrugging her shoulders. "For those who can understand, and we too ought to understand them, even their strange rulers," said Rodis firmly. "And ye will persist?" "I'll try." The blue eye burned hour after hour, but the planet was silent. The starship had moved to the night side when Fay Rodis got up and invited her off-duty companions to the dining room. Everyone energetically took in dark brown bricks of food mixture, tasty enough to encourage the appetite and elastic enough to give work to strong teeth and jaws, a legacy of ancestors who ate all kinds of hard and indigestible dishes. Fay Rodis limited herself to a glass of thick KMT, an olive green drink. Griffrift took only a few sips of clean water. Chetty Don, who remained on duty at the interception of television shows, watched the resumption of the all-planetary news. Before the eyes of television cameras appeared the streets and squares of various cities of Tormance, gathering halls and school auditoriums. Everywhere excited Tormanzians were gesturing, shouting from afar, or bursting out in torrents of words in the immediate vicinity of the receivers. The question was asked, what should be done about the spaceship? And most often these words were repeated. Down with them, away with them, we won't permit them, destroy. A young man dressed in blue appeared on a wide ledge in front of a building resembling an astronomical observatory. The presenter announced that one of the Guardians of the Sky, an organization called to safeguard the inviolability of the planet Yanyak, would speak. The man in blue yelled, "Ye have heard the vile lies of a wretched woman, the leader of a gang of interstellar thieves who, with unparalleled audacity, has dared to call herself the blood sister of our great people. For that blasphemy alone, these dangerous aliens deserve punishment. Our scientists have long established and proved that the ancestors of the Yanyak people came from the white stars to conquer the nature of a forgotten planet and arrange a life here full of happiness and peace." Chetty Don, carried away by the speaker's ridiculous speech delivered with a pathos unusual for Earthlings, voice trembling one moment and shouting the next, did not notice that Fay Rodis had appeared behind her and turned on the translation machine. But even she could not find equivalents for the words vile, gang, thieves, wretched, blasphemy. Rodis retreated to find more information, and Chetty, sometimes resorting to differential increase, continued to peer into the crowd. Young faces, only young, with that impenetrable shut-off from the world expression which shows up on the faces of fanatics or stupid, indifferent people. A sudden hunch led Chetty to activate her signal bracelet and call Ola Dez. Ola came running, flushed after fending off attacks made immediately by Vir Noreen, Tevisa, and Neahali for her romantic attachment to the Lords. Fay Rodis came in after her, carrying a sheet of paper from the Dictionary of Ancient Concepts she had just copied from the Starlet. Found the cryptic words? Chetty could not wait, no matter how much she wanted to express her own hunch. Profanity, that is, words at a low level of development of the psyche, which are considered offensive towards those to whom they are addressed. What for? After all, they do not know anything about us. They apply methods of penetrating into the human psyche through the subconscious, which were once forbidden by our law, but were widely used in the demagogy of fascist and pseudo-socialist states of the ERM. The terrible criminal Hitler, who regarded his people as a herd of monkeys, acted exactly like these Tormansian speakers. He yelled, screamed, turned red in violent fits, spewing abuse and hatred, infecting the crowd with the poison of his unbridled emotions. Instinct is above everything in the crowd, and faith emerges from it. These were his words, which were later utilized in the oligarchic pseudo-socialism of China. They do not debate with their opponents. They shout at them, spit, beat, and if necessary, physically destroy. Ye yourself saw that for the speakers of Tormance, there is nothing but dogma drilled into the head. They do not turn to common sense, but to animal mindlessness. So do not be embarrassed by this profanity. It is just a technique in the developed system of deceiving people. Chetty got up and walked in front of a wall of screens and remotes, clenching her fists with impatience. And I, it seems, have understood, she said slowly. I even called Ola before ye arrived, for an experiment. Rodis and Ola looked expectantly at Chetty. They have a second network of all planetary news. The one we receive daily is monitored and filtered, just like our world network. But if with us this is done to select what is most interesting and important, subject to prior notification, then here it is done with completely different objectives. I understand, Fay Rodis nodded, to show only what the rulers of Tormance want. The selection of news creates a certain impression, or maybe the news itself is being created. No doubt of it. I guess this when I observe the indignation of the public. Groups of people who speak in exactly the same way, with simulated zeal. They are selected in different cities. But we do not see a genuine review of people and opinions, just as the population of the planet does not see it. If so, Fay Rodis began. There must be another network, Chetty went on, along which flows the genuine information. The rulers do not watch the fake broadcasts. It is not only useless, but also dangerous for governance. And you want to tune in to the second network? Asked Oladez. Any thoughts on its parameters? Remember, we picked the nightly reports of the observatories? Oladez bent over the wave interception apparatus, and the arrows of its indicators came to life, probing the transmission channels. Fay Rodis hugged Chetty at the shoulders, pressing lightly against her. Both stared at the blank screen. Blurred contours or drifts of clear lines swam and swiftly rushed through. A few minutes later, loud speech sounded simultaneously with the appearance on the screen of a vast room crowded with rows of tables with graphs and blueprints spread over them. Completely unlike the crowds rampaging on the streets, people in brown and dark gray robes congregated in a circle in the background. They were much older than the rapturous youth. I don't understand this panic, said one in the center of the gathering. We need to receive the starship. Just think how much we could learn from them. Clearly people of a higher culture and so similar to us. That's the point, interrupted the other. But what about the myth of the White Star? Who needs that now? The first frowned angrily. Those who insisted on the immutability of truth in the books of the great genius of Zoam, delivered from the White Stars. And if we are from the planet of these aliens and everything has changed there, then enough. The four have eyes and ears everywhere, interrupted the first speaker. Let us be silent. As if obeying some signal, the people dispersed to their seats at the tables. The eye of the television camera switched to a laboratory with equipment and a wall of mesh cells, in which something living was swarming. Here stood elderly people in yellow coats, and the conversation was also about the starship of the Earthlings. "The extraordinary thing has finally happened," said a woman wearing funny pigtails, which on Earth would be suitable for a little girl. "For millennia, we have denied the idea of high-cultured, intelligent life outside of the planet, or considered it to be the greatest rarity. In the age of wise denial, one starship flew in, and now a second one has appeared, moreover carrying our direct relatives. How could we not receive it?" In a completely earthly manner, an old Tormansian, bent by age, gave the sign of silence. "There," he raised his finger. "They haven't said anything yet." And again, at a silent command, the people parted. The camera switched to a high hall with huge column-shaped machines, pipes, and boilers. And suddenly, everything went out. The receiver's blue eye darkened, a greenish glow lit up the filter window, and a shrieking Tormansian speech was heard. The Earthlings, tarrying in the dining room, hurried to join the observers. "Travelers from an alien planet. Travelers from an alien planet. The Council of the Four calls ye to negotiate. Enter a two-way video communication through a special channel. The technician will explain the method of activation." The dark stereo screen lit up again. An elderly Tormansian in blue sat in a cramped cell, similar to a conventional automatic TVF device. He began to speak into a small microphone in front of him, trying to explain to the Earthlings the parameters of a special channel. Oladez instantly connected the already configured Darkflame TVF. The Tormansian leaned back and froze in surprise when he saw the crew of the starship on his screen. "The spaceship Darkflame is ready for negotiations," said Oladez, with a barely noticeable note of triumph, stumbling a little over the Tormansian pronunciation. The technician in blue, having finally recovered from the shock, pronounced something muffled and inaudible into a cube on a flexible stand, listened to the answer, and raised a pale face. "Prepare yourselves. Choose from among ye those who speak Yanya fluently and know the words of reverence. Switching ye over to the abode of the Council of the Four, a huge room appeared on the screen, all draped with vertical folds of heavy fabric of dense malachite green. In the foreground stood a round table with massive, claw-shaped legs decorated with carvings. On the table was a solitary, pale blue opalescent globe. 4 chairs of the same green fabric stood on a bright, sunny yellow carpet. An astronomical map could be seen on the back wall, glowing dimly above a black cabinet with doors decorated with colorful and intricate drawings. A tall lamp burned on the cabinet, with a pale blue lampshade bordered by a green stripe, casting light on 4 people who lounged with unseemly self-importance in armchairs. 3 were hidden by the shadows. In front of them was a tall, thin man in a white cloak, with a naked head and jutting gray-black hedgehog hair. His hard mouth did not harmonize with his short, blunt nose and penetrating, narrow eyes, eyebrows raised high as if in an effort to figure something out. But Oladez could be pleased. Choyo Chagas produced the impression of the Lord which, undoubtedly, he was. Fay Rodis, still in her red-orange dress, stepped onto the circle of main focus. Choyo Chagas straightened and looked at the woman of the earth for a long time. "I welcome ye, although ye appeared without invitation," he finally said. "It would have taken several thousand years to request an invitation and get an answer." Rodis thought, and her lips trembled in a faint smile that provoked an equally quick reaction. The Lord's eyebrows moved a little. "Let the one who is Lord over ye, and who is entrusted with representing the rulers of your planet, explain the purpose of your arrival," he continued. Fay Rodis briefly and precisely described the details of the expedition, their sources of information on the planet Yanyak, and the history of the disappearance of 3 of Earth's starships at the very beginning of the EWR. Choyo Chagas listened impassively, leaning back and tossing his legs fitted with white leggings over a soft stand. The more arrogant his posture became, the more clearly the Earthlings were able to read the confusion befalling the soul of the chairman of the Council of the Four. "It is not clear to me on whose behalf ye speak, aliens. Ye are all much too young," said Choyo Chagas, as soon as Rodis had finished her message with a request to receive the dark flame. "We are people of the earth and speak on behalf of our planet," said Fay Rodis. "I see that ye are people of the earth, but who ordered ye to say this and not something else?" "We cannot say anything else," said Rodis. We here are part of humanity. Each of the people of the Earth would say the same thing, only perhaps with different expressions or, more clearly, humanity. What is that? The population of our planet. You mean the folk? The concept of folk we had in our ancient times, until all the peoples of the planet merged into one family. But if you use this concept, then we speak on behalf of the united folk of the Earth. How can the folk speak in bypass of lawful rulers? How can an unorganized crowd, commoners moreover, express a united and useful opinion? And what do you mean by the term commoner? Fay Rodis asks cautiously. Part of the population, incapable of higher science, used for reproduction and the simplest jobs. We have no common people, no crowds, and no rulers. What is lawful for us is only the desire of humanity, expressed through the summation of opinions. There are precise machines for this. It is not clear to me what value there is in the judgment of dim and incompetent individuals. We have no incompetent individuals. Every major question is openly studied by millions of scientists and thousands of scientific institutes. The results are made public. Minor issues and decisions on them are taken by the relevant institutions, even separate people, and are coordinated by the councils in the main areas of the economy. But is there a supreme ruling body? None. If necessary, in extreme circumstances, one of the council takes power within the field of their competence. For example, economics, health, honor and law, astronautics. Orders are verified by the academies. I see in ye a dangerous anarchy, and I doubt that your communicating with the people of Yanyak carries any benefit. Our happy and calm life may be compromised. I refuse to receive the starship. Return to your planet of anarchy or continue to roam the abysses of the universe. Choyo Chaga stood up, straightened, and pointed his index finger right at Fay Rodis. The other three members of the Council of the Four jumped up in unison and raised their hands with the sides of their palms facing forward, a gesture of supreme approval and enthusiasm on Tormance. Pale Fay Rodis also extended her hand forward with a calming gesture of the earth. I ask you to think a few more minutes, she said loudly to Choyo Chagas. It is necessary that I contact our planet before taking decisive action. So the true face of the aliens is revealed. Choyo Chagas ostentatiously turned to his associates. Which decisive actions? He narrowed his eyes menacingly. It depends on what the Earth permits me to do. But how can you make contact? Choyo Chagas interrupted impatiently. Ye just spoke of the inaccessibility of distance. Or was that a deception? We have never deceived anyone. In extreme cases, at the expense of an enormous amount of energy, it is possible to pierce through space by way of direct beam. Fay Rodis, companions exchanged glances of astonishment. Sheridan opened her mouth to talk, but Griffrift squeezed her shoulder, eyes commanding silence. Oladez calmly approached Rodis, and the eyes of the four lords focused on this new representative of the Earth. Ola gave Rodis an ordinary microphone for negotiations inside the ship, and moved the TVF frame to a screen in the back of the hull, where the Starship crew usually watched stereo films and idoplastic performances taken from the Earth. There was no doubt for the Starship pilots that both women were acting according to a pre-agreed plan. Fay Rodis began speaking into the microphone, calling on the Stellar Council. The short and melodic words of the earthly language sounded to the Tormancians like incantations. The four rulers remained standing outside the light of the lamp, and Fay Rodis could not keep track of the expression on their dark faces. On the screen, in very real and three-dimensional plastic and natural colors, people of the Earth appeared. In a great hall was a meeting of one of the councils, apparently an excerpt from the Chronicles. Chetty Dawn sharply freed her shoulder from the grip of the Griff Rift. Unworthy deception, she said aloud. Fay Rodis did not flinch, but continued, leaning forward and not taking her eyes off the Lords of Tormance. I translate my questions to Earth into the language of Yanyak, and she began to speak, alternating between the languages of Earth and Tormance. Dear members of the Council, I am forced to request emergency measures. The Lords of Tormance, not having learned the opinions of their people, and contrary to the wishes to the majority of the planet, have refused to receive our spaceship for reasons that were erroneous and insignificant. Lies! Have ye not seen in all planetary broadcasts how indignant the people are, demanding not only that ye be denied permission to land, but that ye be simply destroyed? Choyo Chagas interrupted imperiously. "We plugged into your special network and saw something different," Rodis calmly retorted and continued. "Therefore, I request that ye allow us to wipe the main city, the center of the autocratic oligarchy, from the face of the planet, or to carry out planet-wide narcotization with personal selection." Choyochagas crouched at the edge of the table while the other three rushed forward, arms waving. Oladez quietly moved the idoplastic frames. On the TVF screen, the chairman of the council spoke energetically, pointing to a map above them. The council members nodded in the affirmative. This was a discussion about building a training school for future Tormance researchers. From the outside, it appeared that Fay Rodis had received the necessary permission. "Unheard of! I can't do it anymore!" Chedi Dawn ran out of the hall, rushed to her cabin, and locked herself in, suffering severely. Janatal, Tevisa, and Mentakor moved to follow her, but were stopped by the commanding tone of Fay Rodis' speech. "I have received permission for emergency actions. Please think again. I will wait 2 hours Yan Yak time." Fay Rodis turned to leave the circle of main focus. "Wait!" shouted Choyochagas. "For what actions did you receive permission? Any? And what have you decided? Nothing yet. I await your reply." Rodis switched off the feedback connection of the TVF, leaving the Lords of Tormance in front of the dark screen of their secret network. They did not think to immediately disconnect, and for several minutes, the Earthlings were able to watch their argument and fussy, frightened gestures. "The situation is dire," said a hook-nosed Tormanzian with round and bulging eyes, first assistant of Choyochagas Genshi, as the Earthlings would later learn. "The might of the aliens is undeniable. No matter how they may have lied, the spaceship has tremendous power and, no doubt, mighty weapons. No one would have embarked on long journeys to unknown planets without arms," muttered Zitrino Umrog, "but a starship that lands on a planet." "This is completely different," said Choyochagas, and shouted something to the side. The screen went dark. Rodis wearily dropped into her chair and several times ran her hands over her face and hair from bottom to top, as if washing herself. Griffrift silently held out a glass of KMT, and she received it with a grateful smile. "Brilliant performance," said Oladez with satisfaction, breaking through the dam of indignant silence. "Unworthy, shameful! People of the Earth should not play false scenes and engage in deceit. We never expected that the head of our expedition was capable of a conscienceless act." Tevisa Heneko, Mentakor, Gen Atal, and Tor Lik spoke hotly, vying with one another. Even the stone firm Div Symbol looked condemningly at Fay Rodis, while Neahali, Vir Noreen, Sosan, and Evisa Tanit did not hide their admiration for her. Fay Rodis set down her glass, got up, and approached her comrades. The look in her large green eyes was sad and stern even for an EMH woman. "Opinions about my deed are divided almost in two. Maybe this is evidence of its correctness. No justification is needed. I myself acknowledge the guilt. Again, like thousands of times before, we are faced with the same question: interference, non-interference in the processes of development, or, as they said before, the fate of individuals, peoples, planets. Ready-made remedies imposed by force are criminal, but no less criminal is the cold-blooded observation of the sufferings of millions of living beings, be they animals, be they people. A fanatic or a psychopath consumed with his own greatness intervenes in everything without hesitation or conscience. In individual fates, in the historical paths of peoples, killing right and left in the name of their idea, which in the vast majority of cases turns out to be a product of the small-minded and the sick will of the paranoid. Our world of triumphant communism has long since put an end to suffering from mental errors and the ignorance about power. Naturally, each of us wishes to help those who still suffer. But how can one not slip on the application of ancient methods of struggle, the power of deception, mystery? Is it not obvious that, applying them, we end up on the same level as those who we try to save? And being at the same level, what right have we to judge? For we lose knowledge. So, I have taken one step along the ancient path, and ye yourselves accuse me of an unacceptable act. Fay Rodis sat down at the table, as usual, propping her chin in her hand and looking inquiringly at the silent people. She did not find Che-Dan among those present. She understood the reason, and her eyes became even sadder. Is it possible to completely reject interference? Griff Rift asked, if since childhood and in all social life, society has led people along the path of discipline and self-perfection? Without this, there would be no human. A step above, to the people, is the improvement of its social life, and then of the totality of peoples, of the whole country or the planet. What then are the steps towards socialism and communism, if not the interference of knowledge in the organization of human relations? Yes, it is so, but if it is created from the inside and not from the outside, objected Torlik. Here we are strangers, aliens from a completely different world. Not strangers. We are children of the earth, and so are they, exclaimed Nayahali. For over 2 millennia they have walked on their own, without us. And we do not have the privilege or the right to now consider Tormansians as ours, objected Tavisa sharply. Can a biologist and anthropologist judge so superficially? Winced Iviza Tanit. 2,000 years without us, and millions with us, including the whole final, most difficult path from barbarism and feudalism to the EWR. All the sacrifices, blood, tears, and sorrow along the great path they shared with us, in what way are they strangers? Have ye forgotten that man is the culmination of 3 billion years of natural selection, a blind game of survival, an inferno, the nature of which was first unveiled by Darwin? We are connected through genes by historical continuity with the entire animal life of our planet, and, therefore, Tormansians too. How can we abandon our roots, as the ancestors of the modern inhabitants of Yanyak did for reasons unknown to us? For a long time already, like us, they have known that a person is immersed in an imperceptible ocean of thought, accumulated information, which the great scientist of the EDW, Vernadsky, named the noosphere. In the noosphere, there are all dreams, conjectures, inspired ideals of those who have long disappeared from the face of the earth, methods of cognition developed by science, the creative imagination of artists, writers, poets of all peoples and ages. We know that man of the earth in his psyche gained immense power, which was actualized in the building of a communist society, wonder and the worship of beauty, respect, pride, creative faith and morality, not to mention the basis of the foundations, love. The fact that the Tormansians interrupted this continuity is abnormal. Is there a violation of the first law of the Great Circle, freedom of information? If there is, then, as ye know, we are authorized for the most severe intervention. Convincing, said Salsine. And yet this is not an excuse for the methods of antiquity, said Torlik. Not an excuse, I already said, answered Fay Rodis. But imagine the scales. On one side, we toss aside the opportunity to help a whole planet, and on the other, a false farce played by me. Which side has more weight? There is nothing to argue, Mentakor agreed. But the essence of the matter is not in the ratio of good and evil, grief and joy, which, as we know, are absolute only in measure, but not in comparison. The grain of danger here, as I understand it, is at the level of the deed, for, having stepped onto the path of lies and intimidation, how will we determine the measure and the line, beyond which it is impossible to tread without falling? Menta, ye have expressed the general opinion very accurately, said Cheridan, who had suddenly appeared in the hall. A lie will cause an answering lie, a fear, reciprocal attempts of intimidation, the overcoming of which requires new deceptions and intimidation, and everything rolls down into an uncontrollable avalanche of horror and grief. I am convinced that ye are formulating the essence of the contradiction correctly, but these last steps are still a distant abstraction, said Fay Rodis. The blue eye went out. The planet Yanyak called the Dark Flame. The screens on the ship and in the abode of the Council of Four lit up. Choyo Chaga sat unnaturally straight, arms crossed on his chest, and stared fixedly at the Earthlings. I grant permission to visit the planet and invite ye as my guests. In a day, the ship's landing site will be prepared and communicated to you. Fay Rodis, standing up, bowed, putting a subtle coquetry and female mockery into this movement. Thank ye on behalf of Earth and my companions. There is no need to rush to the landing. We must undergo immunization so as not to expose ye to those pathogenic principles against which ye have no antibodies, and to create immunity for ourselves. Now, having received permission, we will take samples of land, water, and air. Without landing? Yes, there are devices for this. We call them strike missiles. I think we will be ready for landing in 10 days. Furthermore, Fay Rodis paused for a second. Furthermore, the eyes of Choyo Chagas flashed sharply. I'll summon the second starship. She will circulate in high orbit around Yanyak, waiting for us, should any accident befall our starship. Are the pilots of the Earth's starships so incompetent? Choyo Chagas said irritably, while the members of the Council of the Four exchanged discouraged glances. Travelers of space, or the roamers of the universe as the Skyguard called us, should be prepared for any event, Fay Rodis emphasized. The Lords of Tormance nodded reluctantly, and the teleaudience ended.